On November 2, 1920, in the small town of Ocoee, Florida, a seemingly ordinary election day turned into a nightmare that would leave a permanent scar on American history. What began as African Americans courageously attempting to cast their ballots quickly escalated into one of the deadliest acts of election day violence in the United States. Families were torn apart, homes and businesses were set ablaze, and a vibrant community that had built its life through hard work and perseverance was forced into fear and flight. Imagine waking up that morning, filled with hope and determination, only to find yourself facing threats, mobs, and unimaginable danger simply for exercising a fundamental right. For many in Ocoee, that day was a harsh lesson in the lengths some would go to maintain power and suppress voices that dared to speak. The events of that November day were not just acts of violence, they were a chilling reminder of systemic injustice and the fragile nature of civil rights. Today, Ocoee's story remains largely untold in schools, yet its lessons resonate louder than ever. As we explore the events of that fateful day, the lives lost, and the resilience of those who survived, we uncover a story of courage, injustice, and the fight for equality that demands to be remembered. Join us as we journey into Ocoee's dark November, shedding light on a chapter of history too often forgotten. Do not forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss any of our in-depth explorations of untold stories from history. This is a story that needs to be seen, understood, and never repeated. As the morning sun rose over Ocoee on November 2, 1920, Mose Norman, a determined black landowner, prepared himself for what should have been a simple act of citizenship, casting his vote, the promise of participating in a democratic process, a right hard won and fiercely defended, filled him with hope. Yet the air was thick with tension. In a town where racial animosity had been simmering for decades, the courage to step into a polling place as a black man was seen by some as an act of defiance. And Norman knew the risks. When he arrived at the polls, he was met not with a simple procedure, but with obstruction and intimidation. Officials challenged his eligibility, demanded proof he had paid poll taxes, and tried every tactic to deny him his rightful voice. Refusing to be silenced, Norman sought guidance from a white Republican attorney, John Cheney, who assured him of his rights and urged him to continue his efforts alongside other determined black citizens. News of Norman's determination spread quickly, igniting the anger of white supremacists who had long maintained control over the town's political landscape. Fearful that he would galvanize others and disrupt the status quo, a mob formed with the intent of hunting him down. Sensing the impending danger, Norman wisely fled Ocoee, seeking to protect his life from the growing storm of hatred. Yet his escape did not quell the violence. It merely redirected it toward Julie Perry, a respected black community leader who had been deeply involved in voter registration and civic organization. Perry's home became the focal point of fury, and soon a group of enraged men descended upon it, armed with the intent to intimidate and destroy. Perry, aware of the threat but unwilling to abandon his home and family, defended his property with courage, facing the mob as they attempted to break through his doors. In the chaos that followed, the house was set ablaze. Yet Perry and his family clung to the hope of survival. The violence escalated quickly, with reinforcements arriving from neighboring towns, swelling the mob's ranks and ensuring that the black neighborhoods of northern Ocoee were surrounded. Homes, businesses, churches, and community lodges were consumed by flames, and families were forced to flee into the night, seeking safety wherever they could, some tragically encountering deadly hazards in the darkness, including nearby swamps teeming with alligators. Amid the destruction, Perry himself was captured, beaten, and ultimately lynched. His death, a brutal statement, meant to terrorize others who dared to stand up for their rights. The calculated cruelty of the attack extended beyond immediate victims. It sent a clear message that exercising civil liberties came at a potentially lethal cost. For the black community of Ocoee, the massacre shattered lives, uprooted families, and erased decades of progress, leaving behind only charred remnants of homes and livelihoods. The events that day revealed the terrifying lengths to which those opposed to equality would go, transforming what should have been a celebration of civic engagement into a nightmare of violence, fear, and loss. Even as the smoke cleared, the impact of that day endured, not only in the physical destruction but in the psychological toll on survivors and the generations that followed. Norman's initial act of courage, his insistence on claiming a voice through voting, became the catalyst for a tragedy that exposed the deep racial tensions of the time, highlighting both the resilience of leaders like Perry and the devastating consequences of systemic injustice. The story of Ocoee, of Norman and Perry, serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of standing up for one's rights in a society unwilling to accept equality, a narrative that resonates with power and urgency nearly a century later. As darkness fell over Ocoee, the night became a landscape of terror and fire, a grim testament to the hatred that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Julie Perry, a steadfast leader in the black community and a man devoted to organizing voter registration drives, found himself at the center of a storm he could neither control nor escape. The violence that had begun with Norman's attempt to vote now consumed Perry's life in a way both personal and horrifying. Surrounded by an enraged mob determined to suppress black political participation, Perry was seized, beaten without mercy, and ultimately lynched in a calculated act of intimidation. His death was not only an assault on his person but a brutal statement aimed at the entire community, a warning that the pursuit of justice and equality could be met with lethal force. The lynching was only the beginning. White mobs, some openly affiliated with the Ku Klux Klan, fanned out across the town with a single purpose: to eradicate the presence and influence of black residents. The night air was filled with smoke, screams, and the crackle of flames consuming homes that had once been symbols of hard-earned stability and independence. Churches, which had long served as centers of community, faith, and education, were set ablaze, their sanctuaries transformed into pyres of fear and despair. Schools that had nurtured generations of black children were reduced to ash, silencing not only the hopes of the present but the promise of the future. Businesses, carefully built over years of labor and investment, were looted and destroyed, leaving families without livelihoods and a community without economic foundation. As the mob moved through the streets, the chaos intensified, with reinforcements arriving from neighboring towns, swelling their ranks and amplifying the terror. Residents who had sought refuge in their homes found themselves trapped between the threat of fire and the wrath of an armed, relentless crowd. Families fled into the night, many clutching children, stumbling through darkness and uncertain terrain, only to encounter the hidden dangers of nearby swamps. The water, once a source of sustenance and work, became a deadly obstacle, and in their desperate bid for survival, some were claimed by the swamp's hidden perils. By the early hours of the morning, the black neighborhoods of Ocoee had been nearly obliterated. Structures that represented decades of effort and community cohesion were reduced to rubble, and the psychological scars etched into survivors were profound. The violence was not random. It was a meticulously orchestrated campaign to seize property, intimidate citizens, and assert white dominance. Those who had dared to assert their right to vote were now witnesses to a chilling display of power, a reminder that civic engagement carried with it extraordinary risk in a town governed by prejudice and fear. The aftermath left an entire community fractured. Survivors fled, abandoning homes and lands that they had cultivated and owned, and the population of black residents in Ocoee dwindled drastically for decades. The memory of that night was suppressed by local authorities and media, leaving the story largely absent from historical records and educational curricula. Yet, even in the face of such deliberate erasure, the courage of Perry and others who resisted intimidation endures as a symbol of resilience. The events of that November night in Ocoee reveal not only the brutal reality of racial violence, but also the strength of a community's spirit. A testament to the enduring fight for equality and recognition, even in the darkest of circumstances. By the time dawn broke over Ocoee, the town had been transformed into a scene of devastation that defied comprehension. Dozens of African Americans lay dead, their lives cut short by a wave of violence that spared neither women nor children, leaving families shattered and communities irreparably damaged. Those who survived the immediate onslaught were faced with a harrowing choice: stay and risk being murdered or flee into the surrounding swamps, where the darkness and treacherous waters offered only a slim chance of safety. The swamps, filled with hidden dangers and the threat of predatory wildlife, became a grim refuge for the desperate, forcing mothers to clutch terrified children while navigating waters that could claim their lives at any moment. The landscape itself became an unwitting accomplice to the terror, its shadows concealing both hope and peril as families scrambled for survival under the oppressive weight of fear. The destruction was not limited to lives lost. The very fabric of the black community in Ocoee was effectively obliterated. Homes that had been built over decades, businesses that had provided both income and identity, and community institutions that had nurtured generations were reduced to ash. Churches, which had stood as symbols of faith and sanctuary, were torched, while schools that once held the promise of education and progress were left in ruins. Every corner of the northern Ocoee neighborhoods bore the mark of violence, a systematic attempt to erase not only the people but their presence, their history, and their achievements. Families who had worked tirelessly to claim a measure of independence and security found themselves uprooted, their lives upended by a deliberate campaign of terror designed to intimidate and annihilate. The social and economic consequences were immediate and long-lasting. Land that had been cultivated by black residents, often purchased after years of labor, was abandoned or seized under duress, stripping families of both wealth and heritage. The census records in the following decade reflect the chilling impact. The black population, once a vibrant and integral part of Ocoee, had dwindled to nearly nothing, leaving a vacuum in the town that would endure for decades. Survivors carried with them not only the memories of violence but also the burden of a community's disappearance, a testament to the enduring power of fear and oppression to reshape the social landscape. Yet even amid the horror, there were stories of resilience and quiet courage. Those who escaped the night's horrors often went on to preserve the memory of their families and neighbors, passing down stories of both tragedy and survival. Letters, oral histories, and later historical investigations would piece together the events, revealing a narrative that had been intentionally suppressed by local authorities and media for generations. The massacre of Ocoee became a stark reminder of the lengths to which systemic racism and violent intimidation could go to silence a community. Yet it also illuminated the indomitable spirit of those who resisted, survived, and later fought to reclaim their history. The destruction of Ocoee's black community was total in the immediate sense, but the echoes of that night persisted, haunting the town for decades and shaping the experiences of generations to come. The massacre serves as a painful yet necessary reflection on the costs of bigotry, the fragility of civil rights in the face of unchecked hatred, and the enduring need to acknowledge and confront the darkest chapters of history. Through remembering the lives lost, the homes destroyed, and the communities torn apart, the story of Ocoee stands as both a warning and a call to honor the resilience of those who faced unimaginable violence while striving for justice and equality. In the aftermath of the Ocoee massacre, the town's black residents found themselves not only grieving the unimaginable losses of family, friends, and neighbors but also facing the obliteration of everything they had built. Homes that had been nurtured with years of labor, businesses that represented independence and achievement, and fertile lands that had been painstakingly cultivated were abandoned in desperation or forcibly seized. White opportunists moved quickly to claim properties left behind, taking advantage of the chaos to expand their own wealth while leaving the rightful owners destitute and dispossessed. Transactions were often made under duress or entirely without compensation, a stark reflection of a society in which the rule of law offered no protection to those who had been targeted for their skin color. Families who had lived in Ocoee for generations found their roots violently uprooted, forced to scatter across the state and beyond, carrying with them the trauma of a night that erased their community from the map. For decades, the story of what had happened in Ocoee was effectively silenced. Local authorities turned a blind eye to the massacre, taking no action to hold perpetrators accountable or provide restitution to the victims. Newspapers and other media outlets either ignored the events entirely or framed them in ways that minimized the brutality inflicted upon black residents, creating a narrative in which the violence appeared isolated or justified. Generations grew up unaware of the horrors that had occurred in their own town, with children in local schools learning a sanitized version of history that excluded the lives lost and the communities destroyed. The systematic erasure of Ocoee's black residents extended beyond the physical destruction of neighborhoods and property. It reached into collective memory, leaving scars that persisted long after the flames had died down. The social fabric of Ocoee was irrevocably altered. By the 1930 census, the black population had dwindled dramatically, with only a handful of African Americans remaining in the area, a stark contrast to the thriving community that had existed just a decade earlier. The absence of black voices in the town reshaped politics, economy, and daily life, consolidating white control while suppressing dissent and erasing contributions that had been integral to Ocoee's development. Land that had once belonged to hard-working black families was repurposed, sold, or exploited without acknowledgement of its original owners, while the descendants of those displaced often had no means of reclaiming what had been lost. The massacre thus served not only as a moment of immediate horror, but also as a long-term mechanism for racial exclusion, reinforcing systemic inequities and sending a chilling message to any African Americans who might have considered asserting their rights in the region. Even as time passed, the silence surrounding Ocoee's massacre weighed heavily. It was not until decades later that efforts to document and acknowledge the truth began to emerge. Historians, descendants, and community activists painstakingly collected evidence, including death certificates, letters, and oral histories, striving to reconstruct a narrative deliberately suppressed by previous generations. The struggle to recover Ocoee's history highlights the resilience of those who refused to let the events be forgotten, insisting that the lives lost, the lands taken, and the communities destroyed be recognized and remembered. The massacre's legacy is thus twofold: a testament to the depth of racial violence and oppression, and a powerful reminder of the enduring determination to confront the past, restore historical truth, and honor the lives and contributions of those who suffered. Ocoee's story stands as a haunting illustration of the consequences of unchecked hatred and systemic injustice, a warning that the erasure of truth compounds the suffering of the oppressed. The massacre was not simply a single night of violence. It was the beginning of decades of displacement, dispossession, and deliberate forgetting, the effects of which shaped generations and underscored the urgent need to bear witness, document, and educate. By uncovering and preserving these histories, we confront the uncomfortable truths of the past and illuminate the resilience, courage, and dignity of those who endured unimaginable trials in the pursuit of equality. The Ocoee massacre stands as a chilling reminder of how systemic racism, voter suppression, and organized white supremacy can converge to violently undermine democracy. On that fateful day in November 1920, the simple act of casting a vote, a cornerstone of civic freedom, was met with deadly force, leaving dozens dead, homes destroyed, and an entire community displaced. The massacre was not a spontaneous eruption of anger, but a calculated campaign designed to maintain power and silence black voices, demonstrating the lengths to which those determined to uphold racial hierarchy would go. The impact of these actions extended far beyond the immediate victims, sending a clear and terrifying message to anyone who dared to assert their rights that justice and protection under the law were conditional and often absent. For African Americans, for nearly a century, the story of Ocoee remained largely absent from textbooks, public discourse, and educational curricula. Generations grew up unaware of the brutality that had unfolded in their own state, and the achievements and struggles of the town's black residents were intentionally obscured, a victim of deliberate historical inertia. Yet in recent years, efforts to reclaim and honor this history have begun to bear fruit. Historical markers now commemorate the lives lost, research has been preserved in archives, and curricula are slowly incorporating the truth of Ocoee's story, ensuring that the lessons of that day are not forgotten. By uncovering the realities of the massacre, we confront uncomfortable truths about the persistence of racial injustice and the fragility of civil rights when met with organized opposition. The legacy of Ocoee is both a cautionary tale and a call to action. It reminds us that democracy is not self-sustaining, and that the rights we often take for granted have been and continue to be hard-won through struggle, courage, and resilience. It highlights the necessity of vigilance, education, and active engagement in the pursuit of equality. Above all, it honors the memory of those who perished, those who survived, and the generations affected, insisting that their stories be acknowledged and their contributions recognized. By remembering Ocoee, we not only pay tribute to those who suffered but also reinforce our commitment to a society where such atrocities are never repeated. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the darkest chapters in American history. Your attention and reflection on these events are vital to keeping this story alive and ensuring that the lessons of Ocoee continue to resonate. If you found this exploration enlightening, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more untold stories from history. Sharing this video with others helps spread awareness, preserves the memory of those affected, and contributes to a more informed and conscious world. Together, we can honor the past while working toward a future defined by justice, equality, and understanding.